first guided reading recording for that. Today we'll be looking at excerpts from pages 1 through 37. And there is a checkpoint assignment 1 through 37. And there is a checkpoint assignment just to give you a summary to refer to as we go through the lesson. I'm putting up an announcement. I'd like you to move this announcement over to the side so that you can use it during the lesson to make reference to what we are actually doing with each part of today's lesson. By the way, for anyone who doesn't know, I am Mrs. Williams. I teach LAC 1. I'm one of the LAC 1 teachers, and probably you've had me as at least a substitute because we do cover one another's classes quite a bit. So great to see you today. And here we go. We're going to dive into this wonderful biography, good grief, diary by a young girl. So today's reading focus, we are looking at character. So we're going to get to know Anne Frank. That's our main goal today. We're going to really focus on her personality, and who she is as a character within her own diary. So taking a look here, this is the reading summary that I just shared with you in that announcement. Again, you can move that announcement off to the side. This is kind of a reading summary of those first 37 pages that we're going to take a look at today. We're only looking at excerpts from the 37 pages, but this is kind of how the diary progresses. So Anne receives the diary for her birthday. At the very beginning, in her first couple of entries, she struggles with her purpose and audience for the diary. So as a writer, she's thinking about, who am I writing this for? Why am I writing this? And she does settle those concerns in the diary. We'll take a look at that. It's kind of interesting. Next, we'll take a look at how the historical context impacts Anne's daily life. So in last week's Achieve article, you were kind of introduced to the Holocaust. Also in yesterday's lesson, you took a look at Anne and her life in the historical context. We'll see her talking about that in the actual diary. So we'll see some evidence of that and how it impacts her daily life. We're also going to take a look, though. Anne is just a normal teen in some ways. She's kind of into boys. She's got some issues with her teachers that we'll take a look at. Wonderful entries about both of those things. The next thing that happens in this set of readings is the call-up. We'll talk about what that means as we go through, but it is the call-up. It has to do with the Holocaust and whether Anne Frank and her family are allowed to exist in the community as they have before, or whether they will get called up and taken away to concentration camps or the various places where the Nazis would take those targeted during this time. They do go into hiding. In one of the entries, we'll see when she initially goes into hiding, she'll describe the place that she is hiding in as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about the stress of hiding. So she'll be in hiding for 3 months in these entries. And so we will see that begin to take its toll. So keep up that announcement. Don't get rid of that. Just move it off to the side so we can refer to it throughout today's readings. First, we're going to take a look at some vocabulary that you will encounter. First word is unbosoming. So when we have a word like this, what we want to do is break it down into its parts, which is what I've done here below. You can see it does have a prefix, un, and a suffix, ing. And the root word, or the core word here, is bosom. So if we take a look at the meanings that are associated with the prefix, suffix, and the root word, we can actually determine the meaning of the word. So when we encounter the word bosom, that has to do with a person's chest or heart, where secret feelings and thoughts are kept. When we see the prefix un, we always think not. in this case, we want to apply that not to the idea of being secret. So the feelings and thoughts are becoming not a secret. In other words, they are coming out. And when we take a look at the word ing, this is happening now in the moment. So in the unbosoming, we see Anne is going to be sharing her secrets, her thoughts and feelings as they happen in the moment. Those things that are normally kept secret are coming out. For example, if someone were to tell a complete stranger all of their secrets, which does happen sometimes, maybe that's happened to you before, if someone reveals to you a bunch of their secrets, they would be unbosoming. He is unbosoming himself to a complete stranger. Next vocabulary word, this time we're going to use word origins to better understand vocabulary. So we have the word ardor. It's enthusiasm or passion is its actual meaning. If we take a look at the Latin root, it actually means a burning heat. So if you think of this as a burning heat in the chest, like a feeling of love or enthusiasm, then you're kind of getting a feel for what ardor really means in all its complexity. Anne uses the word ardor to describe some young boys that she encounters, and she says something along this lines. His ardor, so the burning heat of his passion, eventually cools, especially since I ignore his passionate glances. So she tries to cool that fire that she encounters sometimes in young boys. Next word, we're going to use prefix and suffix as well as origins to break down this word, incorrigible. This is a word used to describe Anne at one point by one of her teachers. So let's take a look here. When we encounter the word in, that also, or the prefix, sorry, in, that also means not. Okay, so we want to remember in and un both create the opposite of what is happening. Okay, so what is the root word? The root word comes from the Latin corrigere, and it means to be corrected or changed. So if Anne is in corrige, she is not corrected or changed. At the end of this word, we have the suffix ible, which means able to be. If we put all of those together, we find that Anne, in her teacher's opinion, is not able to be corrected or changed. In this case, she is described, and you'll see here in the reading when we get started, as a student who is an incorrigible, so cannot be corrected or changed, chatterbox. So you can just imagine that part of her personality. Some other vocabulary that you'll be watching for, and it is highlighted in blue within the text as we read. Watch for this vocabulary. Enhance is to intensify or increase the value of something. So you can enhance the flavor of a dish by using fresh herbs. So you can increase the value of the dish, the intensity of the dish, of the flavor. Pogroms are an organized massacre of a particular ethnic group, so very similar to the word Holocaust, in particular that of the Jews in Russia or Eastern Europe. So when Anne talks about the pogroms of 1938 and her two uncles fled Germany when this happened, that is because they were experiencing an organized massacre of the Jews in Germany and had to flee. So that is, when you see that word, that is what it means. There are also reminders on each page where you encounter these vocabularies, so that'll be helpful as well. Rampant, we looked at this in our Achieve lesson on Friday, which is great. It means flourishing or spreading unchecked, and in this case, the example is the mayor promised to put a stop to the rampant crime that plagued the city. So rampant crime is flourishing or spreading unchecked, which is not what we want crime to be doing, right? The last word is blithely, lacking due thought or consideration. So in this case, we have Anne describing her behavior with certain boys. She ignored his advances and pedaled blithely on her way, without thought or consideration for the boy at all. So when we're going to do a visualization with this word later, and so when we do that, remember that she's going to ignore and pedal without thought or consideration at all for the boy she is with. We're going to encounter some other words that you might not know. We are going to use context clues to help understand those words, and the ones that we'll be looking at together are highlighted in green. So you can pay attention to that. Okay, we're ready to begin reading. You don't need to follow along in your book. So you don't actually need your book for these recordings. We will have all of the text is in the PowerPoint presentation. So just follow along with me as I read. Sunday, June 14th, 1942. I'll begin from the moment I got you. The moment I saw you lying on the table among my other birthday presents. I went along when you were bought, but that doesn't really count. On Friday, June 12th, I was awake at 6 o'clock, which isn't surprising because it was my birthday. But I'm not allowed to get up at that hour, so I had to control my curiosity until 6:45. When I couldn't wait any longer, I went to the dining room where Morchi the cat welcomed me by rubbing against my legs. A little after 7, I went to Daddy and Mama and then to the living room to open my presents. And you were the first thing I saw, maybe one of my nicest presents. Then a bouquet of roses, some peonies, and a potted plant. Now I must stop. Bye-bye. We are going to be great pals. So what you see here is the diary being introduced, and you can tell that she is speaking to kind of an unknown audience at this point. And after she gets the diary, she writes the first entry, and almost immediately in the next few entries, she begins to struggle with, who is this audience? Who am I talking to in my own diary? And why am I writing? Why does what I'm writing matter? Who does it matter to? All of those questions. But for now, she is addressing the diary almost like a letter. So you can see that she is using the first person like we talked about yesterday. And she's kind of, even saying goodbye, kind of signing off at the end of this entry. Next, we're going to take a look at her struggle to figure out who she's writing this for and why she's writing it. So what is her purpose and audience? Vocabulary reminder here, when she uses the word unbosomings, that is the telling of secret thoughts of the heart, just as a reminder. So here we are at number 2 in our summary, and struggles with purpose and audience for the diary. Saturday, June 20th, 1942. I have it written for a few days because I wanted, first of all, to think about my diary. It is an odd idea for someone like me to keep a diary, not only because I have never done so before, but because it seems to me that neither I, nor for that matter anyone else, would be interested in the unbosomings of a 13-year-old schoolgirl. Still, what does that matter? I want to write, but more than that, I want to bring out all kinds of things that lie buried in my heart. Okay, so with unbosomings here, we did pre-learn that vocabulary, but you can see that there is also a contextualized, almost a definition for that word shared within the context of the text. So you can see the word unbosoming. She's going to write her unbosomings, the things that lie buried in her heart. So sometimes, often, we encounter words in the text. We can figure out their meaning from the context by reading around the word. There's a saying that paper is more patient than man. It came back to me on one of my lightly more melancholy days, while I sat, chin in my hand, feeling too bored and limp to even make up my mind whether to go out or stay home. Yes, there is no doubt that paper is patient, and as I don't intend to show this cardboard-covered notebook bearing the proud name Diary to anyone, unless I find a real friend, boy or girl, probably nobody cares. And now I come to the root of the matter. The real reason for my starting the diary is that I have no such real friend. So within the context of this text, we encounter the word melancholy. And she gives kind of a description of that feeling here. What I want you to do is, as I reread this little section, I'm going to turn on my video and do it along with you, act out what she's doing here. And think about what that means melancholy might mean. So while I sat, chin in my hand, feeling too bored and limp to even make up my mind whether to go out or stay home. So she's not feeling excited. She's not feeling giddy or boisterous. She's feeling sad and melancholy. Okay? So we can tell from her actions, the actions that she describes, we can tell what this word means, that it means that she's feeling a little down on a melancholy day. And part of the reason is that she says she has no such real friend. Let's explore that a little more. On this page, as vocabulary reminders, we have the word enhance, to increase the value of. Pogroms, remember that's the organized massacre of a particular ethnic group. And that one is on the next slide. So that one you won't see till the next slide. But I couldn't fit it on the next slide. So you are reminded of that word now. Okay, diving a little more into this idea of purpose and audience for the diary. Saturday, June 20th, 1942 continued. Let me put it more clearly. Since no one will believe that a 13-year-old girl is completely alone in the world, and I'm not. I have loving parents and a 16-year-old sister, and there are about 30 people I can call friends. I have a throng of admirers who can't keep their adoring eyes off me, and who sometimes have to resort to using a broken pocket mirror to try and catch a glimpse of me in the classroom. To me, that's another great one to picture. Her sitting in the classroom and some boy using a mirror to try to look at her. Can you picture that? Super funny. I have a family, loving aunts, and a good home. No, on the surface, I seem to have everything, except my one true friend. And this might be something that you can relate to, this feeling that, wow, you have lots of people who you know, that no one really knows that inner self that is who you are and who you know yourself to be on the inside. All I think about when I'm out with my friends is having a good time. I can't bring myself to talk about anything but ordinary, everyday things. We don't seem to be able to get any closer, and that's the problem. Maybe it's my fault that we don't confide in each other. In any case, that's just how things are. And unfortunately, they're not liable to change. That is why I've started the diary. Okay, so we have a sense of her purpose now. Her purpose is to write her inner feelings that she doesn't have anywhere to share into the pages of her diary. To enhance the image of this long-awaited friend in my imagination, so to intensify or increase the value of, this long-awaited friend in my imagination. I don't want to jot down the facts in this diary the way most people would do, but I want the diary to be my friend, and I'm going to call this friend Kitty. So now we see that not only does Anne have a purpose because she wants to confide in someone. That is her purpose. She wants to reveal her heart to someone. She doesn't have a friend to do that with. And so she creates a friend that she now calls Kitty, and that is her diary. We're going to pause here and do some rereading because I think this is a great section, first of all, and also because we need to practice fluency. So fluency is being able to read something with emotion. When you read something over and over, eventually you practice enough and you're able to read that with a lot of emotion. So that's the goal here. So what you're to do right now is to pause the recording, stay on this slide, choose either the whole slide or one paragraph within this slide, and reread it until you can read it without tripping up. You can read it without mistake. You can read it with emotion in a fluent way. You get to choose which part you want to use, and pause to complete the rereading. So once again, you're going to choose either the whole slide or one paragraph to reread until you can read that section without making a mistake. You can read it fluently, kind of a little more quickly. It doesn't have to be super fast though, because what you really want to do is read it with emotion and personality. Okay? So pause now and practice that work. We are now ready to answer the first checkpoint questions. If you have your checkpoint open, you can go ahead and take a look. Number one asks you this question. Anne struggles with her audience and purpose for writing in her diary. What does she decide? Does she decide A, her audience is an imaginary friend, Kitty, and her purpose is to reveal her innermost thoughts and feelings? B, does she decide her audience is future readers and she hopes to share what happened to her for the sake of historical preservation and memory? Or C, she decides not to worry about an audience or a purpose for her writing? Go ahead and put your answer in. Remember that you can pause this recording as needed. I'm going to move on now. So we are now to Saturday, June 20th, 1942. In this section she moves on, she begins to talk about the historical context, and we'll see the ways in which that historical context impacts Anne's daily life. So if you still have up that announcement and that summary, we're moving on to number 3. Our lives were not without anxiety. Since our relatives in Germany were suffering under Hitler's anti-Jewish laws, after the pogroms in 1938, my 2 uncles, my mother's brothers, fled Germany, finding safe refuge in North America. My elderly grandmother came to live with us. She was 73 years old at the time. After May 1940, the good times were few and far between. First, there was the war, then the capitulation, and then the arrival of the Germans, which is when the trouble started for the Jews. You can see this word refuge. We can tell from the context that it means that they left to find a safe place in North America. So right there, a safe refuge, a place to go that is safe. So you can use that context to figure out the meaning of that word. In this next section, we have a ton of green you can see. And let me circle a bit here. We're looking at what anti-Jewish decrees are. That is the vocabulary word that we're looking at in context here. And the rest of this paragraph really tells us some details about what that word means. Remember, she says the trouble started for the Jews with the arrival of the Germans. Here's what happened there. Our freedom was severely restricted by a series of anti-Jewish decrees. Jews were required to wear a yellow star. Jews were required to turn in their bicycles. Jews were forbidden to use streetcars. Jews were forbidden to ride in cars, even their own. Jews were required to do their shopping between 3 and 5 p.m. Jews were required to frequent only Jewish-owned barbershops and beauty parlors. Jews were forbidden to be out on the streets between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Jews were forbidden to attend theaters, movies, or any form of entertainment. Jews were forbidden to use swimming pools, tennis courts, hockey fields, and other athletic fields. Jews were forbidden to go rowing. Jews were forbidden to take part in any athletic activity in public. Jews were forbidden to sit in their gardens or theirs of their friends after 8 p.m. Jews were forbidden to visit Christians in their homes. Jews were required to attend Jewish schools. And this word etc. just lets us know that is only a very shortened list of the things that Jews were restricted from doing. Okay, so we can see that the anti-Jewish decrees were the things that Jews were required to do. So the rules around what Jews could do during this time. She sums it up here. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, but life went on. Jacques always said to me, I don't dare to do anything anymore because I'm afraid it's not allowed. So this is that historical context having a major impact on her life. And in future entries, it's going to have even more of an impact. We are back to Saturday, June 20th, 1942. This is a rather long and interesting entry. And we are moving on in our summary. So if you look at the announcement, the next few slides are going to, we just looked at the historical context, and yes, that was a huge thing in Anne's life, but she is also just a typical teen. And so in the next couple of slides, we're going to see her dealings with boys and teachers. We'll get to know her a little bit from those happenings as well. So our ping pong games usually end with a visit to the nearest ice cream parlor that allows Jews, either Oasis or Delphi. We've long since stopped hunting around for our purses or money. Most of the time it's so busy in the Oasis, we manage to find a few generous young men of our acquaintance or an admirer to offer us more ice cream than we could eat in a week. You're probably a little surprised to hear me talking about admirers at such a tender age. Unfortunately, or not, as the case may be, this vice seems to be rampant at our school. As soon as a boy asks if he can bicycle home with me and we get to talking, 9 times out of 10 I can be sure he'll become enamored on the spot and won't let me out of his sight for a second. So enamored, he becomes so enamored, so into her, right? We can use the context to understand this, that he won't let her out of his sight. And as you know, rampant means widespread. So it's widespread at her school that 13-year-old boys are paying attention and into the girls, even though she kind of says, it might surprise you because we're a little young. Talking about boys a little more, his ardor eventually cools, especially since I ignore his passionate glances and pedal blithely on my way. If it gets so bad that they start rambling on about asking father's permission, I swerve slightly on my bike, my school bag falls, and the young man feels obliged to get off his bike and hand me the bag, by which time I've switched the conversation to another topic. These are the most innocent types. Of course, there are those who try to blow you kisses or try to take hold of your arm, but they're definitely knocking at the wrong door. I get off my bike and either refuse to make further use of their company or act as if I'm insulted and tell them in no uncertain terms to go home without me. This is, as I told you earlier, a funny scene to pause and visualize. If you can visualize her, she has these boys who are interested. They want to ride home with her on the bike. Let's visualize this. So when we visualize, you might want to close your eyes, try to picture it. We're trying to make a mind movie. It's one of our reading strategies of the things that are going on. I do this still when I read. I picture things all the time, and sometimes I physically do the things that I'm reading about. So for example, when we put the chin, our hand in our chin in our hand, and we were practicing being melancholy together, that's something that I actually do when I read. If an author tells me what the facial expression of a character looks like, what I find is that I will make that face. And it's a wonderful way to really get into the text, to actively read and interact with the text. So let's try it. You can close your eyes if that makes it easier, or you can keep them open and follow along with me. I ignore his passionate glances and pedal blithely on my way. So what I picture there is her looking away, maybe even looking fully away, like the opposite direction, and pedaling along without a care for the boy who's following her. Okay, picture this now as a mind movie. If it gets so bad that they start rambling on about asking father's permission, I swerve slightly on my bike, my school bag falls, and the young man feels obliged to get off his bike and hand me the bag, by which time I've switched the conversation to another topic. Kind of a clever way of distracting there, Anne. Of course, there are those who blow you kisses and try to take hold of your arm, but they are definitely knocking at the wrong door. I get off my bike and either refuse to make further use of their company or act as if I'm insulted and tell them in no uncertain terms to go home without me. You can picture all of those things happening as well. So we are at checkpoint number 2. What do we learn about Anne from her thoughts and stories about boys? Which character trait best describes her? So we have A, disinterested, B, confident, and C, shy. Let me read those details for you. A, Anne is disinterested when it comes to boys. She's too young to really like them yet. You think that's true? B, Anne is confident in setting boundaries with boys. Or C, Anne is very shy and can't bring herself to speak to boys her age. So she's too shy to even talk to them. A, B, or C. Remember that you can pause at any point if you need to think about the question. That's fine, you can pause. And we are moving on. This next section talks about Anne at school and some of her interactions with her teachers. We learn more about her, even more about her, from this scene. This is Sunday, June 21st, 1942. You can see she's written for several days in a row now. I get along pretty well with all my teachers. There are 9 of them, 7 men and 2 women. Mr. Keesing, an old fogey who teaches math, was mad at me for the longest time because I talk so much. After several warnings, he assigned me extra homework, an essay on the subject, a chatterbox. A chatterbox? What can you write about that? I'd worry about that later, I decided. I jotted the assignment in my notebook, tucked it into my bag, and tried to keep quiet. That evening, after I'd finished the rest of my homework, the notebook about the essay caught my eye. The note about the essay caught my eye. I began thinking about the subject while chewing on the tip of my fountain pen. Again, that's something that I can really picture. Her chewing on the tip of her pen. I don't do that, but I have seen people do that, and so that's something I can readily picture in my mind's eye. Anyone could ramble on and leave big spaces between the words, but I thought and thought, and suddenly I had an idea. I wrote the 3 pages Mr. Keesing had assigned me and was satisfied. I argued that talking is a female trait and that I would do my best to keep it under control, but that I would never be able to break myself of the habit, since my mother talked as much as I did, if not more, and that there's not much you can do about inherited traits. Mr. Keesing had a good laugh at my arguments, but when I proceeded to talk my way through the next class, he assigned me a second essay. This time it was supposed to be on an incorrigible chatterbox. I handed it in, and Mr. Keesing had nothing to complain about for 2 whole classes. However, during the 3rd class, he'd finally had enough. And Frank, as punishment for talking in class, write an essay entitled "Quack, Quack, Quack, Said Mrs. Chatterbox." So if we look back at that word incorrigible, remember when we broke it down, we did see that it meant not able to be corrected or changed. So her teacher calls her an incorrigible chatterbox, and she's assigned an additional essay. And this continues that story. The class roared, and I had to laugh too, though I'd nearly exhausted my ingenuity on the topic of chatterboxes. It was time to come up with something else, something original. My friend San, who's very good at poetry, offered to help me write the essay from beginning to end in verse. I jumped for joy. Kensing was trying to play a joke on me with this ridiculous subject, but I'd make sure the joke was on him. I finished my poem, and it was beautiful. It was about a mother duck and a father swan, with 3 baby ducklings who were bitten to death by the father because they quacked too much. Luckily, Keesing took to the joke right away. He read the poem to the class, adding his own comments, and to several other classes as well. Since then, I've been allowed to talk, and I haven't been assigned any extra homework. On the contrary, Mr. Keesing's always making jokes these days. Yours, Anne. So as a reminder, she is writing to Kitty, and she always signs off yours, Anne. It's in the form of a letter. So some of these entries, we're not seeing that part of it, but that's just a reminder to you that she is signing off most entries and beginning with Dearest Kitty or Dear Kitty. She's writing to this imaginary friend who she feels she can reveal all to. So checkpoint 3, what does this story reveal to us about Anne's character? Anne's personality shines in this story about school. Which observation about her is the most true? A, Anne's school story reveals that she is a mean girl. B, Anne's school story shows how shy and awkward she is in school. Or C, Anne's school story reveals her confidence, competitive drive, quick wit, and sense of humor. So does it tell us that she is competent, kind of competitive, easily jokes easily, right? Or is it one of these other 2? That is checkpoint number 3. So we've talked about Anne's normal teen life, how she's interacting with boys and her teachers. Now we move into the call-up. You can see she addresses Kitty here. This is Wednesday, July 8th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, it seems like years since Sunday morning. So much has happened. It's as if the whole world has suddenly turned upside down. But as you can see, Kitty, I'm still alive, and that's the main thing Father says. I'm alive all right, but don't ask where or how. You probably don't understand a word I'm saying today, so I'll begin by telling you what happened Sunday afternoon. At 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I didn't hear it since I was out on the balcony lazily reading in the sun. A little while later, Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway looking very agitated. Father has received a call-up notice from the SS, she whispered. Mother has gone to see Mr. Van Daan. Mr. Van Daan is Father's business partner and good friend. I was stunned. A call-up. Everyone knows what that means. Visions of concentration camps and lonely cells ran through my head. How could we let Father go to such a fate? Of course he's not going, declared Margaret, as we waited for Mother in the living room. Mother's gone to see Mr. Van Daan to ask whether we can move into our hiding place tomorrow. The Van Daans are going with us. There will be 7 of us all together. So here we see this historical context having even more of an impact on Anne. It's really turning her world upside down. Her father, she thinks at the time, receives a call-up, which if we look at the context here, we can tell means that her father will be sent to a concentration camp, put in a lonely cell, or, as we know, it might just mean that he is killed. So that is where they are at, and they need to move into hiding. Silence. We couldn't speak. The thought of Father off visiting someone in the Jewish hospital and completely unaware of what was happening, the long wait from Mother, the heat, the suspense, all this reduced us to silence. So I'm going to read that line again, and I want you to kind of get into the emotional context here, what's going on for her. Those last couple of lines I think are really powerful and can show us how this feels. Silence. We couldn't speak. The thought of Father off visiting someone in the Jewish hospital because he doesn't know yet, and completely unaware of what is happening. The long wait for Mother, the heat, the suspense, all this reduced us to silence. So later in the day, Anne finds out more about the call-up. Margaret told me that the call-up was not for Father, but for her. At this second shock, I began to cry. Margaret is 16. Apparently they wanted to send girls her age away on their own. But thank goodness she wouldn't be going. Mother had said so herself, which must be what Father had meant when he tried to talk to me about our going into hiding. Hiding? Where would we hide? In the city, in the country, in a house, in a shack? Where? When? How? These were questions I wasn't allowed to ask, but they still kept running through my mind. Just try to imagine that situation. Not knowing. Margot and I started packing up our most important belongings into a school bag. The first thing I stuck in was this diary, then the curlers, handkerchiefs, school books, a comb, and some old letters. Preoccupied by the thought of going into hiding, I stuck the craziest things in the bag, but I'm not sorry. Memories mean more to me than dresses. Father finally came home around 5 o'clock, and we called Mr. Kleinman to ask if he could come by that evening. Mr. Van Daan left and went to get Niepe. Niepe arrived and promised to return later that night, taking with her a bag full of shoes, dresses, jackets, underwear, and stockings. After that, it was quiet in our apartment. None of us felt like eating. It was still hot, and everything was very strange. In this section, as Anne's packing up to go into hiding, she states that memories mean more to her than dresses. What does this tell us about her as a person? This is your checkpoint 4. Does it tell us that A, Anne hates to wear dresses and takes the opportunity to leave all such clothing behind? She finally can no longer need to be a girly girl. B, Anne is a wise person. While some of her choices are not practical, she has no regrets and prioritizes keeping her memories over more practical matters like clothing. Or C, Anne is a practical person. She takes only what she will need into hiding. Clothes, shoes, and food are the main items she packs. Which of those three things is true about her as a person? Again, you're welcome to pause the recording if you need to look those over a little more. Here is the hiding place. We get introduced to it by Anne. The hiding place was located in Father's office building. That's a little hard for outsiders to understand, so I'll explain. Father didn't have a lot of people working in his office, just Mr. Kugler, Mr. Kleinman, Miep, and a 23-year-old typist named Beep Voskuhl, all of whom were informed of our coming. Mr. Voskuhl, Beep's father, worked in the warehouse along with 2 assistants, and they were not told anything. The door to the right of the landing leads to the secret annex at the back of the house. Okay, so you can see the door. No one would ever suspect that so many rooms were behind that plain gray door. There's just one step in front of the door, and then you're inside, right here. Straight ahead of you is a steep flight of stairs. To the left is a narrow hallway opening into a room that serves as the Frank family living room and bedroom. So if you go back this hallway, you go into the bedroom, which you see right here, which serves as their living room and bedroom. If you go up the stairs, so now we're going up the stairs, and open the door at the top, you're surprised to see a large, light, and spacious room and in an old canal side house like this. It contains a stove, thanks to the fact that it had been Mr. Kugler's laboratory, and a sink. So here is where the kitchen area is. The kitchen and bedroom of Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan is here, as well as the general living room, dining room, and study for us all. A tiny side room upstairs is Peter Van Daan's room, or will be. At the bottom here, you can see here is the sink for getting washed up in, and there is one bathroom as well. Also in the back here is the room that Anne shares with her sister. So she and her sister are here. Her parents are here. The Van Daans are upstairs, and they have to share their room as a kitchen. You can see it's very close quarters when they go into hiding. This was from Thursday, July 9th, 1942. So 3 months later, there are quite a couple entries here, but not a lot, and most of them are about the stress of confinement, the stress of hiding, and how it leads to character conflicts. Okay, so a lot of the characters are now in conflict with one another. You have a mother and a father and 2 daughters. You have another mother and father and a son, all living in very close quarters and dealing with a lot of stress. Anne has a little reflection that she shares. She says, anyhow, I've learned one thing now. You only really get to know people when you've had a jolly good row with them, which is an argument. Then and only then can you judge their true character. So this is 3 months being in that confined space. Here are some of the things that they had to deal with. We have forbidden Margot to cough at night, even though she has a bad cold. So imagine you have a horrible cold and you're not permitted to cough. You cannot make a sound. You have to be silent. She says, it's the silence that frightens me the most in the evenings and at night, because during the day, regular life is happening outside of the place, so it's not quite as silent. But that silence at night, if anyone were to hear Margot's coughing or anything else at night, it could reveal that they are there. We have to whisper and tread lightly during the day. Otherwise, people in the warehouse might hear us. So even during the day, there's a sense that they have to be very careful. Mrs. Van Daan is unbearable. I get nothing but blow-ups from her over my continuous chatter. So remember, Anne's personality doesn't change. She's just in hiding now. And so she's still kind of a chatterbox, but has to keep that under caps at all times and be aware of it. And of course, she's getting on the other mother's nerves, Mrs. Van Daan. Just imagine there is no bath. We use a wash tub, and all 7 of us take turns to make use of this great luxury. So they have nowhere really to get cleaned up other than that sink that we took a look at. And so they use a little basin to clean up as they need to. Who 3 months ago would have ever guessed that Quicksilver Ann would have to sit still for hours? What's more, who would have thought she could? Okay, so she writes that about herself, kind of surprises herself by being able to do that. But when it's a life and death situation, we can do things that we didn't anticipate we would be able to. So this is the last of our, in your announcement, this is the last of our summary. We've encountered the stress that is going on in hiding. Checkpoint 5, Ann gets into many conflicts during the stressful first 3 months we read about in these pages. Which of the following is not a reason for her stress? So which is not a reason for her stress? Ann needs to be quiet and still much of the time. Does that cause her stress? She does not get along with some of the others in hiding. Do you think that causes her stress? See, she is attempting to mature like a normal teen in the midst of all of this. So all of this is happening, but she is still trying to grow and become a mature person. D, her puppy Arthur has run away. Okay, which of those is not a reason for her stress? You can go ahead and answer that now. And lastly, this is a little check your understanding slide. You're welcome to keep this up. You can pause here and keep this up as long as you want to. You can check your answers for checkpoint 1 to answer for check